Southern Fried Asian. I'm your host, Keith Chow. This is a special episode. It's a little different from the episodes we've done in the past. I'm actually talking to my brother, Raymond Chow.
He's run out of guests. He's found all these Southern Asians he could find, and he's scraping the barrel.
Well, so it's not, you're actually not my guest. I'm having you on so I can talk about me.
We're just going straight into that dynamic right away.
It's
wow.
Therapy.
Wow, this is okay.
I don't care about your life.
See, for those of you who don't know us, that's more true than you think.
It's not true. I do care about your life.
No, I know you care about my life, but in the context of talking about your life. Yeah.
So there was this Transformer toy I bought.
Yeah. This is really the prequel, so you can launch your toy show and this is your excuse to talk about your Transformer toy. Yeah.
That show was already launched, by the way. It shows how much you pay attention.
I don't buy toys.
So this is the Chow Brothers episode of Southern Fried Asian.
You guys want an hour and a half of this?
You're welcome, listeners. Oh, and this is the thing. Southern Fried Asian has got a higher profile now. This is the first podcast we've recorded since Vanity Fair deemed us an essential AAPI podcast. Apple Podcasts has curated us alongside a bunch of other Asian American Pacific Islander podcasts that are way more important than this one. So welcome, new listeners.
I will do my best. This is the brother. I realize also you pick someone that sounds like you, so this isn't going to this isn't good.
Well, this is our homage to They Call Us Bruce, where Jeff and Phil sound exactly alike as well. So yeah. We should just preface every time we start talking with
hello,
this is Keith.
Yeah, this is Raymond.
Do you really think we sound... This is a question to the listeners out there. Do we sound alike? Do you know who's speaking right now?
I don't think we sound alike, but I know that people do think we sound alike.
Facebook thinks we look alike as well, and I don't see that at all.
I'm more forgiving for the algorithm to think that we look alike. Because, it's not crazy that we would sound a little bit alike, right? Like, other brothers that I know sound like each other, but not to the degree that, like, people can't distinguish us. Whereas I feel like, I don't know how many other situations, just other, like, conference calls we've been on together, I feel like that's happened where people didn't know who was talking.
I always said that, like, if I ever had an interview, a phoner that I had to do and I couldn't do it, that you could literally dial in for me and just pretend to be me.
I'm pretty sure you've also suggested that for just, like, in-person events.
Just Nerds of Color stuff in general. Yeah, be me.
He looks 7 years younger for some reason, but that's fine.
Asian don't raisin, man.
Okay. Look, we can start there. I have two dumb ideas about that. You want to hear the first dumb idea or the second dumb idea?
Let's start with the second.
Okay, so the second dumb idea is, okay, it's true. You don't age, right? Like, Asians don't age. Fine, that's true. But what happens is, if you have, like, a face that looks 40, even though you're 25, you have that face forever. You just look 40 forever. Like there's Asians that look 40 and they just stay looking 40 forever. And then you have, you look like a 13-year-old until into your 60s. So it's like, is it really great that you don't age? Because you still look like a child.
Well, that's the thing about Asian aging as well, is that, like, you don't age for the majority of your life. And then for the last 10, you look like a really old person. Like, I don't know.
Except, you know what? I won't name which uncle, but we've got an uncle who's looked like he's been 60 since he was, like, 35.
I know which uncle you're talking about.
I know you know which uncle, but that's what I'm saying. Like,
but the question is does the uncle listening right now know which uncle we're talking about?
It's fine.
I'm pretty sure he does too, though.
Yeah, he knows. But that's what I'm like. But he hasn't aged a day. He looks exactly the same because he's looked like he was 65 since 1982.
This joke only works for a very select group of people listening to this podcast.
No, everybody's got that Asian uncle. Everybody's got that uncle that...
So what's your first hot take on Asian aging?
The other hot take is I'm pretty sure that's just a marketing scam by Big Korean Skin. Right? Like, it's, Asians don't age. Then you set up this false dilemma of, like, I'm an Asian person. I need to look like I have really clear skin. I'm gonna go to K-Town and buy all of the masks and keep this up. Do you know how much work Asians are putting in to keeping their face looking that way? Asians don't raisin. Yeah, because they have massive amounts of chemicals and creams on their faces at all times, and they avoid the sun like they're gonna die.
Yeah, Asians are vampires. Is what you're saying. So yeah, welcome to Southern Fried Asian, Raymond.
Thank you.
Do you feel Southern fried?
Well, what makes it fried?
I don't know. I just thought it was a fun name for a podcast.
Yeah,
and because we're going to talk about food ultimately at the end of this.
Oh, that's true. That's true. Yeah, no. For context for the listeners, I live in New York. I sound like Britta.
I can excuse the racism.
Yeah. I live in New York, and I still feel like I'm from Virginia. And I guess there's a separate question of does Virginia count as part of the South? But yeah,
really? Is that a question? Does Virginia of all places count as the South? Well, I don't think anyone asks.
I feel like Georgians, Alabamans, they seem to and you know what? Virginia's gone from purple to blue.
Oh, right. If your narrow definition of Southern
now.
is
it's not part of the South. It's Mid-Atlantic now.
Yeah, that's bullshit. By the way, you can't just erase the history of Virginia being the fucking seat of the Confederacy.
There, 2 months ago or last month, there was that story about I think there were Army officers who were at an IHOP. And there was a lady who got into a racial argument with the officers, with the lady was gonna buy them a meal, and then she decided to not buy them the meal afterwards, and it was this whole thing, and it made the local interest story level, and it's just funny to me because it was oh, I know where that IHOP is. I eat it. Our parents eat that IHOP all the time.
Wait, was it in Chesapeake?
No, it was on
Route Northern 1.
Virginia. Yeah, it was on Route 1. On what was formerly Jefferson Davis Highway.
Right. But I also understand the kind of reputation of Northern Virginia, quote unquote, not really being Virginia, right? That whole bullshit about real Virginia versus non-real Virginia. It's all real. It's all Southern. But I think to your point is it's kind of defining what it is to be Southern. Is it a geographical thing? Is it a cultural thing? Is it a... Right, and then when we say a cultural thing, is it are we talking about white Southerners? Because, people of color have lived in the South for 400 years.
Here's a question. Here's something I was thinking about. We grew up, you more so than me, but I was born in Luray.
You were born in Harrisonburg.
Okay.
They broke the mold after I was born. Literally.
In the Blue Ridge Mountains, in the Shenandoah Valley, born and raised.
You were born in the Massanutten Mountains because it's Harrisonburg.
God.
It's the other side. Anyway, go ahead.
But we were in the mountains, right?
Mm-hmm.
So does that technically mean that we're hillbillies?
Well, what if you're in the valley? We were actually in the valley. We weren't actually in the mountains.
That's the difference between a redneck and a hillbilly, right? Just as a matter of defining terms, a redneck, you have a redneck because you worked out on the farms, and that's why you have a redneck, right? And then, so you're agrarian and you're on the plains. But in the mountains, in the Blue Ridge Mountains, that would mean that you're a hillbilly, right?
Yeah, I think the term we used was hick.
Hick.
We were hicks.
True.
We grew up around hicks. Even the terms rednecks and hillbillies were not
really,
that we use.
I feel, that's true. So redneck, I probably didn't really start to hear redneck until...
we moved out of, Luray, at least.
Yeah.
Because the thing is, and, those who have listened to this podcast have heard me tell the story
pieced together the origins of Keith Chow.
Oh, God, it's going to be an hour of this, isn't it?
Hour and a half, buddy. Hour and a half. This is going to be extended edition.
All right. The Snyder cut of Southern Fried Asian.
I look forward to your edits.
You know what? Here's the thing. I ain't editing shit this time. I'm really? Keeping in all of the ums. I'm keeping in all of the...
You're keeping in all of my ums, but none of your ums.
I don't have ums. We don't
Oh, God.
I'm the non-umming Chow. No. See, there it goes. That one's getting cut. So I've told the story of leaving Luray, which is more rural, more... traditionally quote unquote Southern, and moving to the Hampton Roads area, which was a little bit more urban, a little bit more diverse, a little bit more populated, and having that culture shock, right? You did that move much earlier than I did, and at a younger age. And you have talked to me, not on this podcast, but you've talked to me, of course, as because we are brothers and related and have conversations not on record.
We're just going on record that we do talk, guys.
I'm just putting it out there.
We're just letting you know it's a healthy fraternal relationship.
You've talked about how you don't even really remember living in Luray. Like, that's a formative part of your life, but not really.
Like, I remember the green of the backyard, and I remember it being vast, but it was vast because I was 5 years old. No, really, like, 3 years ago, two or 3 years ago, we went back to Luray to Baisan to go see Grandma and Grandpa's graves, and Brown's was still, like, we were still able to go into Brown's, which I guess your audience knows what Brown's is. And we were able to go in there. And that was the first time that I had a very conscious feeling of how small Brown's was. Like, it's a fairly, for a Chinese restaurant today, it's a fairly good-sized restaurant for a middle-of-nowhere Chinese restaurant. But, like, in my mind's eye, because my memories of Brown's is as a 5 to 8 year old, it's cavernous. Like, it could fit in my mind. I imagine it fitting like 300 people easy, and like
right, like a really, banquet hall.
Yeah, it's like a banquet hall, and like really, it was like, I don't know, 150, 200 max. Like in every single space, and
right.
like
if you count the 2 extra party rooms,
yeah, the wings, right? And like and but just like in my mind, because I saw it as a 5-year-old, it's proportionally bigger in my head, and I can't really square that circle. And now that the space is no longer really accessible to us, it stays this kind of cavernous space, and I think that's also because, in my mind, I compare it to our parents' restaurant in Jade Garden, where, like, that's where I grew up. So that place going from, being a child's eye space to, like, me as a teenager, I knew that it was small.
Mm.
Still of a certain generation of Chinese restaurant that kind of doesn't exist anymore.
Right. Not takeout. It wasn't buffet.
Yeah, a little larger than just takeout, but not quite a banquet hall style, right? Definitely of a certain generation of what American Chinese restaurants could be.
I'm going to blow your mind. That trip to Brown's was 7 years ago.
That was 7 years ago?
Yeah, because Brown's has been gone since 2014.
Oh, because that's when the last time that was when it was.
If you're remembering walking through the restaurant, it was 7 years ago.
No.
Yeah, 2014 was the last time we were able to step foot at Brown's Chinese American restaurant, the restaurant that brought our family to Luray. And actually, that's the one thing I wanted to talk with you about as well, because...
Can I go on the record? Because I don't think that uncle listens to this. I stole a bottle of Dewar's.
I don't think, even if he listens, which he doesn't.
What's he gonna do?
What's he gonna do?
Open a commission?
Even though this episode is titled The Chow Brothers, I actually wanted to talk about the Chu family, since we're talking about Luray, because they are the ones who came to that part of Virginia to open that restaurant. And I know you've done some probably more kind of scholarly digging into our family's history than I have.
I mean, no, I haven't done any scholarly digging. What I will say is, like, I've talked about it with another friend that, like, it would be interesting to see if we could do a FOIA request about our granddad, because we're pretty sure that theoretically there should be a file, or there's possibly a file, so that would be interesting. But everything else is just kind of like, there's a lot of hearsay that we could try to put together to kind of find out the whole narrative, because there's a lot of missing gaps. So I mean, so I was born in 84, right? And great grandfather died 82.
Yeah.
So I never knew him, and he's pretty pivotal from what I gather in terms of like why we're in Browns and like the whole kind of DC to Browns, the way that our family kind of branched between DC and Page County was kind of a setup between him and Granddad. Like there was something about kind of the way their particular immigrant story that set it up in this particular flow, right? And I don't know how much of it is true or how much of it is kind of retconned after the fact and kind of this is how we're going to tell the story kind of thing.
And to be fair though, like that's the case of so many like Chinese American immigrant
100%.
stories, right? Like
Right.
the whole Paper Sun is a retcon of
Right.
your life story. Yeah, I mean, I actually do have fading now that I'm getting older, but memories of great grandpa Bakong, we called him. But again, like I was 5 when he passed, so I don't.
Right.
The same to you. He was this gigantic man, even though he was much older, who always wanted to shake my hand, and that's all I remembered until he passed. But you're right, he is the patriarch that brought the Chews to Virginia. He had come to America like decades before everyone else, right? Because he actually, I remember seeing like he had a certificate, I guess, or some letter from President Reagan thanking him for his service during World War II, I believe. So he was like in America in the 40s. Maybe in West Virginia, possibly.
So he came first to Wheeling, West Virginia, right? So our mother's side of the family follows the kind of typical Toisanese route, right? Of like, of being journeymen, not intending to stay and not really staying, right? So we have a great-great-great-grandfather that was in like San Francisco around the time of the earthquake, right? And there's a missing bit of clarity there in terms of kind of what happened to him in terms of like why he never came back, because I think he never came back. But then like great-grandfather, what was interesting to me to learn about great-grandfather after the fact was that he was a literate man. Like he could read in English and Chinese, which maybe I shouldn't be quite so surprised, but like in my mind, it's just something that I had never really considered. But like, so here's the origin story that as I understand it, and any uncle that's listening to this podcast, if they want to correct me, please tell me where I'm wrong. But from what I understand, Bakong was in DC at the time, in DC Chinatown, when DC had a Chinatown. And there was another guy who had heard about Browns and wanted to go look at it, but he wasn't very confident in his English and he wasn't sure how to negotiate. So he talked to Bakong, who like, hey, you know English, can you kind of be my middleman? And so Bakong went, and he's like, and then he liked the place, so then he's like, you know what, I'll take a share too. And then like down the road would buy out the guy. So like in that, so for him to know English and like being able to be bilingual, like is the reason that that our story goes that way at all. I feel like that's how Mom told it to me, but I might be missing like a key detail here or there. But like that's how we found, like that's why Browns. How did we find Browns? It was somebody else found it, and Bakong was able to talk to be the negotiator.
Right, and just for like clarity for folks who aren't familiar with rural Virginia, Luray is about 2 hours, hour and a half if you're driving a little bit over the speed limit, I suppose, from Washington. So it's like southwest of DC. And so, yeah, the notion that like, you have this family living in Chinatown and seeing this, traditional American restaurant go up for sale isn't far-fetched,
which is why
right?
the place is called Browns, right?
Right.
The place is called Browns because it was just kind of a regular diner, I guess. And then when our Chinese asses took it over, we just kept the American name. And then like, and I always love I guess technically it's not a Chinese name, but like the Chinese characters that were on the side of the wall is American Chinese food. Like that's all it ever said. It's like, oh, okay.
Yeah. We didn't give it like,
No.
J Dragon number 1 or anything like that.
Golden
right?
Harvest.
Or even like how like even suburban Chinese restaurants run by Chinese folk have like the American name, like China Palace or whatever, but then the Chinese name is like, J Dragon or whatever.
Yeah.
Ours was just, Zhongmei Jiaoga.
Yeah.
Chinese and American restaurant. And that was the subtitle. It was Brown's Chinese and American restaurant. Because we've sold like super hamburgers and spaghetti as much as we sold chicken chow mein and rainbow beef. I feel, that's what I mean. I feel like you have more of a historical context of our family and our family's place in Luray, whereas for me, it was just kind of experiential. Like, it's all nostalgia for me living in Luray. That's why I was being like a little facetious about you've done the scholarly work, and whereas I just lived it, and I don't have the historical context. But it's fascinating to me, right? Because to your point, like our family's history very much mirrors so many early Chinese American immigrants, where we had generations who were American or came to America, lived in America, that we could trace back to the 19th century. And yet you and I are the children of first generation immigrants.
Right. And that is such a particular kind of dynamic, I think, definitely for me, and I would assume for you too, of kind of why and how we think about ourselves as Americans. I think a lot of times when you're a first generation immigrant, you don't necessarily have like a ton of cousins that are going through the same thing as you, and we did, right? Mm-hmm. Or for me, I don't know how much you've talked about this in the past, but like I think it's very interesting that like in some ways the dynamic is very different for me and for you, because you grew up with our mom's side of the family kind of more directly interacting with them, and then by the time that I was kind of age to have more memory, like actually start making memories, I was spending more time with the Hong Kong side, our dad's side of the family, when they came to America.
Who emigrated much later. So
immigrated in the 90s.
Yeah, our dad's side of the family came pre-China takeover of Hong Kong, which was in the mid to late 90s, whereas, as we said, our mom's side, at least directly, like our generation above us, was here since the 70s. And it was definitely a different dynamic. To your point, like the cousins I grew up with were not only like Americanized, firstborn, they were also mixed. Like all of my cousins that I grew up with were mixed. Like they're our cousins, but the cousins you grew up with were not only immigrants themselves, but they were like immigrants from Hong Kong. So their cultural touchstones were already Chinese. And I feel like that's also why I've always felt, and you could correct me if I'm wrong, but I've always felt you've had a closer connection to your Chinese side than I did, because of, you grew up not being ashamed to like watch movies from Hong Kong.
Well, let me reframe that. Let me reframe that a little bit. Were you ever at one point ashamed of watching Hong Kong movies?
I mean, I don't know that it was consciously ashamed, but I actually said this on a recent podcast that like I had like a cultural superiority complex
about being American,
Sure. So like when we would go visit our family in Hong Kong before they immigrated to America, and I would hear like the Cantonese versions of American pop songs.
Oh, sure.
Even though I'm like an 8-year-old, like snot-nosed
It wasn't
dork.
the right version.
Yeah.
It was a copy. It was an imitation. Sure.
Right.
So I want to reframe it a little bit. It's not so much that I think that I'm more in touch with my Chinese side, because you talk to any Chinese people, they will call me a banana in a heartbeat. Just, yeah. But
empty bamboo.
Yeah. But I think that I think the difference is two things. One is that I also grew up in the late 90s, right? So the access was different.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
you had VCDs.
I had VCDs of all of of like hundreds of Hong Kong movies, right? Like the abundance of what I had access to versus you. You had like 3
Fearless
movies.
Hyena. I had Fearless Hyena. That was the only.
You had Fearless Hyena and Enter the Dragon. And
Yeah.
and Dance of the Drunken Mantis.
Maybe.
You did. Because Dance of the Drunken Mantis didn't have it had the ending cut off, and it was a cartoon with like a white.
It was a Batman.
No, there was like this like white ghost looking thing, and he'd like be chased by a cop. There was this like dumb '80s terrible art cartoon that got taped over the ending of Dance of the Drunken Mantis, and it always bothered me.
Oh, well, I think Dad did that for like all of his Jackie Chan movies, because my memories, Fearless Hyena, at the back of that was the old Batman cartoon.
Was a Batman cartoon, yeah.
With the one specifically with Sweet Tooth, which was like Dom DeLuise or somebody, in basically. But the villain is essentially like a fat guy who loves candy, and that's his like villain gimmick. And this was the old school, like Casey Kasem as Robin and Adam West as Batman cartoon. And that's my memory of Fearless Hyena, is like just fast forwarding through it to get to Batman.
Yeah, so I think that like the abundance like definitely made a difference of like making me feel comfortable to it. And I think that that's a dynamic that Asian America has to contemplate in the future, because now that we're in a, Web 3.0 world where even if you are born in America and you're not quite as geographically you're still geographically disconnected, but you're not as electronically kind of disconnected from the content, right? Like the ability for K-pop and K-drama to be accessible to you as a Korean American creates just a different dynamic than what it was like for us growing up as Chinese people, even like yes in the South, but like, outside of, if you weren't in Chinatown and had access to, a video store in Chinatown, you didn't have those things.
Right.
Like our parents, think about that, like at the time of our parents living in Virginia, what they would do is that they would go to Chinatown every couple of months, yes, to buy groceries, yes, to see friends and family, but also to switch out their rentals of movies and television shows. Right? Because like that was the only way they were going to get any access to what was going on in China, in Hong Kong, really. Right.
And I think that's the other thing, I mean, of course the time period made a difference, but also being in Hampton Roads, there was more access to other Asians. You didn't have to drive 2 hours every couple months to go to the Asian store.
Yeah, that's true. Right.
Whereas like for me, I didn't really grow up around Chinese culture. Like I said, our family on mom's side is much more westernized.
Yeah,
right?
but what I'm saying is I want to be careful about the language here, because I don't want it to suggest that means that you're like that there is this lesser Chinese experience.
Sure, right.
Because of what's important to suggest, more so now than ever for lots of different reasons, is that there are other ways of being Chinese. Absolutely access to language, absolutely continuity of the culture is important, but it's not the only factor in like saying what it means to be Chinese or exploring Chineseness.
And that's the ultimate project of this podcast, right? Like exploring other ways of being Asian and not kind of like pigeonholing yourself into like, this is the only way, like boba tea, Chinese language school. Like those aren't the only ways to show your Chineseness or your Asianness, right? But they often, because those are the Chinese and Asian stories we see, is the only way to express one's Asianness, right? Like, for me, it was the complete opposite. Like, not only did I not have access to that, it wasn't even a thought, right? Like, that went through our parents' minds to say Saturday school for you, Because where the fuck were we going to go for Saturday school?
Sure.
Sure. So I think that's part of the, like, and it's not just necessarily being in the South, but it's definitely being kind of, I make the joke all the time. If you go to the Wikipedia of Luray and look at the demographics of like the 80s and it says 0.02% Asian, that's literally our entire family, right? I mean, I'm being facetious there. I think there was one or two other Asian families in Luray, but generally, like, I mean, there were like 14 of us.
Here's a question about your upbringing. Were you ever Christian curious?
I did Kinney Bible, which is when this little van parks next to the elementary school. And then you have to sign a waiver, basically. Like, even in Luray in the 80s, they needed to get permission for kids to take Kinney Bible classes.
Oh, I took that class.
Yeah.
With the little felt, with the little
sticky
Jesus
felts.
And the felt,
yeah,
the felt
that was
apostles.
awesome. I love that. Because it was really cool that they would tell like Bible stories with little felt characters that they stick on this board.
And it was cool to get out of class.
And to our parents' credit, Dad was always like, I'm not going to not expose you to things, but I want you to.
I mean, he went to
Christian school, right. But our family wasn't Christian.
Yeah.
But no, but he was never going to be like, if there was if Luray allowed mosques or synagogues to come visit elementary kids, Dad probably would say sure. But to answer your question, I mean, I memorized John 3:16.
Yeah, I know John 3:16.
Who doesn't know?
I also know Austin 3:16.
And that's the bottom line.
Yeah. No, but unfortunately, we that means you lost an hour of computer time. Because I had one kid that didn't go.
No, we didn't have computer time.
Oh, well, that's what in my time I remember very clearly. Like, I'm sitting in this room watching, like, learning about Jesus, and, like, you can see outside the van into our classroom, and there's a kid, and it's the one kid who didn't go. I don't know what his system was, but he's on the computer playing he's playing some computer game, and it's like, I want to play the computer game. I don't want to do this.
Wait, so
I don't remember signing any papers. I just went.
Well, no, I mean, our parents signed the papers. We didn't sign the papers.
Well, but I'm saying nobody asked me, hey, would you like to go learn some Jesus stories with the fellas?
No, it's a envelope that went home at the beginning of the year, and Mom and Dad just signed it. And for all intents and purposes, like, Mom and Dad could have just signed whatever. But I just remember having a conversation with Dad, maybe later in life, not when I was 7 and going to Kenny Bible, but him saying that, like,
Father, what shall we believe?
But I recall him saying that, like, I think you should learn all of it, because again, I remember, like, having to memorize John 3:16 and then kind of, like, reciting it in the kitchen, you know what I mean? And then maybe that's where he said that, like, you can believe whatever you want to believe, but Jesus shit is crazy. Was, I think, a paraphrase of what Dad had said to me at 7. But did you go to school in Luray before? I guess you were. I was second grade when you moved.
I left third grade.
Third grade. Oh, okay.
Because I remember starting third grade there, and then I moved to Chesapeake, or I moved to we moved to Hampton. We moved to Hampton for 6 months, and then from Hampton I went to Chesapeake.
Right, and just so you guys know why we're talking like this, at that point, Mom and Dad decided to branch out on their own, open their own restaurant. So they found one eventually in Chesapeake, Virginia, which is in the Hampton Roads, Virginia Beach part of the state.
4 hours away.
4 hours away from Luray. And so I was just starting 10th grade, and they made the decision that because I was already in high school, it would be better for me to at least finish 10th grade. So I moved in with my grandmother, and then they took Raymond and moved to Hampton and ultimately moved to Chesapeake. And that's why we're talking as if, like, we didn't live together for a year.
You didn't want to stay? Yeah, why are you framing it that way? What the hell is that?
Fine, I didn't want to go.
They made the decision. They weighed the cost. They did a cost-benefit analysis, taking into account my feelings, and they said, no, but we think it's best you should stay. No, you wanted to stay, right?
Sure.
Look,
I did.
I wasn't there for the conversations, so just tell me if I'm wrong. But
no, I wanted to stay. I didn't want to go.
Stay.
And okay. Truth be told, my entire 11th grade year, I was a walking gothy pain in the ass because I didn't like the fact that I moved. But it all worked out. So I want to dig back into, like, just some more of your, like, Luray memories before we go into, like, your memories of Chesapeake. But do you think at, like, that last year or so in Luray, like, you're old enough to have memories. I know that you said they're kind of, like, faint and you were a child.
Sure.
But, like, what is your lasting memory of Luray? And do you still feel like Luray is home? Or is, like, when you think of home, you think 757?
I'm not avoiding your question, but I guess I'm trying to reframe it to be a little bit closer to how I feel about it. Luray doesn't feel like home, but it does. I do feel an ownership of it,
mm-hmm.
even though I have very little to do with it, and I have no say in any. I don't feel I have any right to, like, say what should go on in Luray. Like, I have no desire to try and turn Luray into, like, a democratic enclave or something, right? Like, it's kind of the place that it is, but I do feel a sense of ownership to it because I have a right to that place because that's where my grandparents are,
mm-hmm.
right? Because it's a part of where our family is, and who knows? maybe that becomes the place where we all like start leaving ourselves 30 years from now. And we have family there still. Like, we still have family there, right? So, like, it's not home in that sense, but like, it's certainly a place that I feel like I have a right to. But let me compare that to, I also feel that way about Hong Kong. Like, I feel about Luray something similar to how I feel about Hong Kong, as a place that I did not grow up in. But again, a place where I've got my grandfather buried, or interned,
in a mausoleum, yeah.
In a mausoleum, right? And like, so to the degree that like, I think about what happens in Hong Kong, and I think about what happens in Luray, and like, what it means for me to be able to access these spaces, because I should have access to these spaces.
And so Chesapeake, then, I feel like, I mean, when you, just in the kind of esoteric terms, but like Chesapeake is probably your real sense of like, that's where I grew up. I'm from 8 to 20, whatever.
Yeah, and I mean, and I still have a lot of friends there. You know, I still go back there every couple of years at this point, and, you know, I'm happy to see everybody that I still know down there. But on some level, the place has moved on, and I've moved on a little bit, right? Like, Jade Garden isn't there anymore. We don't have any family there.
Right.
So, like, when I go down there, it really is for kind of the nostalgia. And, you know, I do it for, like, the nostalgia of, like, my college years, the nostalgia of, like, the places I would go to in high school, right? But, like...
But it's transient. Like,
but it's transient.
Ultimately.
I don't feel like... I feel at home when I'm, like, seeing my friends there, but, like, I don't feel any attachment to, like, a specific location anymore. Because, like, the one place that I would have that attachment... Like, all of the houses, the various houses that we lived in over the... You know, through the course of living in Chesapeake, like, you know, it's not like we can go back to those places. So... There is no sense of continuity there. Jade Garden is, I think it's still a Chinese restaurant right now. There might be Thai, actually.
Oh, really?
But I think it's like Pan-Asian. But like, it's, you know, the it's not set up the way that it was when we were there.
And to be honest, that changed even when it was still in our family, but that's another story.
When I was, so for the audience, yeah, I say this at like job interviews, and I use this as a dumb line, but I always go like, you know how you go to a Chinese restaurant and there's like that little kid in the corner doing his homework, and then he like takes your order. Yeah, that was me growing up. And like I say that in interviews all the time. And like, I'm just saying this to you because like for the context of like, you know, the closet. There was a closet next to the cash register that like I spent
that you grew up in. That was home.
20%. Yeah, I spent about 40% of my childhood in a closet, and that's how I grew up. I working and living in a closet, watching TV on a 6-inch screen. But like I spent, you know, and like for that closet to not be there is like, well, this isn't my restaurant anymore.
Right. It's still wild that you didn't take the peacock with you.
I mean, it was a sticker. You couldn't take that.
You could take the wall. They tore the wall down.
What the thing was like my entire body weight. What am I going to do with that?
What am I going to do with a wall?
You know what I did take? I did take the styrofoam characters of the restaurant.
You still
name.
have that?
The jade broke.
Oh. That seems like a metaphor.
Yeah.
So it's wild that the first time you watched Deep Space Nine on a widescreen television must have like blown your mind. Because you had only seen it on 6 inches.
Are we talking about Deep Space Nine?
No, we're not going to get
much more comfortably. Can we have a much more comfortable conversation about Deep Space Nine rather than mining my childhood?
We can talk about Star Trek when you come on Hard Knock Life. For this is therapy. We're going to talk about our childhoods here. So going back to that notion of like home, it's really fascinating for you to say that actually, because I didn't know that about you. Because I feel the same way, right? Like there is a part of me that will always feel like Hampton Roads is home if I see people I know, if I drive by the place that used to be Regal. I guess is Regal still there? I don't know. But when it was, you know, like when I had Funscape.
Regals,
yeah. Like,
yeah, that's still a movie theater.
Like but that's what I'm saying. Like that I remember as like nostalgic and like homey. And, you know, of course, you know, I met my wife there. I went to college. To you, it's the same thing. It's like, it's our college life. For a lot of people, you know, your college memories is not home, but it's where I went to college, right? I kind of think about, like, you know, when I interact with some of my Oscar Smith high school friends, it's like, yeah, but there's not that sense of, like, I'm from here. You know, like, as an example, if I meet someone and I see they have a 757 phone number, like, oh yeah, there's a familiarity and a recognition. But when I think of, like, where am I from, it's still always going to be Luray.
Sure.
You know what I'm saying?
Sure. Right. And so I would say that, like, I don't feel that way about Luray. I don't think I would say I'm from Luray. I do say that, like, oh, I was born in Luray. Like,
even though you weren't.
So I have a lot of friends, right, who grew up in Virginia Beach, and they will not allow me to say that I grew up in Virginia Beach because I grew up in Chesapeake. Which is what I want to say is that I grew up in Chesapeake. But
no one knows where Chesapeake is.
Listen, exactly. Nobody knows where Chesapeake is.
Like a bay? You grew up in the bay? They think you're from Maryland if you say that.
Yeah, so someone asks you, where did you grow up? And I have on occasion, not out of shame of Chesapeake, but just out of ease of, just moving past this part of the conversation, I have said Virginia Beach. Because you can't say Hampton Roads.
Right.
Sometimes people don't know what Hampton
the fuck that
Roads
is either. Right. Tidewater. No one knows what that is.
So I say Virginia Beach, where people have gone because they're tourists and they have toured Virginia Beach. And then I happened to do that in the presence of someone who was from Virginia Beach and knew that I grew up in Chesapeake, and they gave me a fuck ton of shit about it. And I have no desire to say that I'm from Virginia Beach. It was just easier in the moment.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I do feel that, like, no, Chesapeake, Hampton Roads, that's where I grew up. And, like, that's, if you're asking me, like, where do you think of your childhood? Yeah, I think of Chesapeake.
Your formative years.
Yeah. Like, I have the memory of, like, walking back and forth from the restaurant to the house.
Right. And for the listeners, our house was right behind the restaurant.
It was 7 blocks away. You had to cross the highway. There were rabid dogs in the fields. There were snakes. There actually were snakes in that little patch of dirt in between.
But it's still, you still say, though, like, that time, even though you spent from, like, 8 to 20, whatever, you still feel like that's the transient part. I know you just said that you don't feel like you're from Luray either, but there's still a part. I mean, the thing for me is that I kind of claim the entire state, even though
you avoid Richmond like the plague.
No, I don't avoid.
And how many times have you been to Roanoke in your life?
Well, I was about to say, except for, like, the western part. I don't think I've ever stepped foot in, like, the boot part of Virginia, right? Like, Roanoke and Blacksburg and that side of the state. But, like, you know, I have connection to Northern Virginia, you know, Page County, the Shenandoah Valley, Richmond, and the peninsula even, and, you know, of course, Virginia Beach. So, like, I feel like I have, like, a affinity, at least, for most of the state.
Sure.
So that's easy for me to say. But yeah, to break down, like, which part of the state really, truly, like, when I think of where am I from, it's always going to be Luray. Even though, again, I had so many formative years, you know, the latter part of high school, my entire college career, all in the Norfolk, Virginia Beach area.
But I think that answers the question. Is the question you're asking is not where do you think home is? It's where is your childhood?
Mm-hmm.
And Luray is your childhood.
Yeah.
Right. By the time you moved to Hampton Roads, you thought you knew who you were.
Right.
Right. Which is why you coming to Chesapeake. Oh, I hate that I'm not in the place where I knew who I was. I finally figured out who I am, and now I gotta be somebody else again.
That's exactly how I sounded.
That's what you were going through was this sense you had an identity crisis that was tied to who you were as a child at the end of your childhood and into your, you know, post adolescence. The timing of the moving was right at the time to, like, affect how you thought of yourself. Right.
That's right.
Because and fairly, because, like, yeah, it is a lot of fucking work to, like, make friends all over again, and, like, especially when you're at 10th grade, so you're what, 16, 15?
15, yeah.
15, so, you know, you got your hormones running, and, you know, it is a lot to process as a teenager. And if on top of that we're going to layer in, you know, the racial identity politics that we've touched on earlier, yeah, that will factor into it too in unseen ways of a sense of I don't want to say inferiority, but, like, you know, having a complex about, like, there aren't a lot of other Chinese people, so feeling isolated.
But it was actually the opposite though, right? Because like for me, I remember that first year in high school in Chesapeake was a culture shock because it was so diverse.
Sure.
There were so many other people of color that I wasn't used to, like, being around that many people of color and being isolated from other people of color. Because the other thing about being in Luray, because we were the only Asians and there was a very small black population, you kind of almost felt a sense of solidarity because everyone else was white. And you know, and it's funny though, like, looking back, yeah, of course there was hella microaggressions everywhere, right? But like, the idea that, like, you know, even the fresh off the boat scene, like the smelly noodles at lunch, like no one had that in Luray growing up, right? Like even though we were around,
because they were eating squirrel. What the fuck did they
yeah,
know?
right. That's what happens when you grow up with hicks. It's different than growing up in Orlando or whatnot, right?
Yeah, it's like that scene. It's like that scene in Martial Law, the Sammo Hung show, where it's like Arsenio Hall or the gentleman before Arsenio Hall. He's eating collard greens, right. And Sammo Hung is like, "Oh, collard greens, we love these. Like we love these." It's like, yeah, come on, guys, we're all eating the same vegetables. Let's get along. You know,
Courtney and I literally had that conversation when we were 13 years old, right? So, but that's what I'm saying. Like going from Luray to Chesapeake and being in an environment where like there were other black people who didn't like you. Right, automatically, right? There were other Asian people who didn't like you automatically. That was the learning curve for me, right? It was like, oh, like, you know, there was never that like head nod moment at Oscar Smith, that first year at least, you know, and it took a while. It took getting to know folks, like you said, you know, having to like prove who you are all over again was tough. And again, just being around other groups of color without kind of like that automatic sense of familiarity that you had when you were in Luray, right?
Well, I mean, that's another part of it too, right? Is that Luray's high school, the total class of Luray's high school was probably like one class, like all four classes of Luray's high school was probably like one class of Oscar Smith.
Right. The cafeteria alone in Oscar Smith could fit the entire student body of Luray High School the year I left, 1993.
Yeah. And I don't know if there are like really annoying sticklers on your podcast, and like maybe we're off a little bit in numbers, but you know, we're being a little fast and loose with numbers, but it was definitely bigger.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. For sure. I mean, and I guess that's the other kind of like difference between me and you is, you know, to your point, like having that childhood very, you know, specific to a place that isn't ultimately very diverse, right? So like my view of the world was fairly limited. Like if not for MTV, I probably would have an even narrower view of the world, right? In Luray, because this was the 80s. All we had was cable TV and there was no internet. There was no like outside world. Like you were saying, at least you had a connection to like Chinese pop culture through video CDs and, you know, the early age of the internet, you know. That's another thing that I think is kind of like informs the way I see myself as an Asian American. Cause like what you were asking me earlier, like, was I ever ashamed? I don't know if it was shame is the word, but there was definitely like a disconnect about even being considered Asian until I got to college, right? Like until I was actually around other Asian people I wasn't related to. And you had a different experience because you had Asian American friends in elementary school and high school.
I mean, I didn't really have, I guess to go back a little bit in terms of kind of the path of my exploration of my Chineseness, for just a very easy shorthand of what we're talking about, right? Like in high school, I had a friend who spoke Cantonese, right? And if I look back at that time and I look back on my life, that was really important because it was somebody in my age group, it was somebody in my social group who I could talk about these things, right? Because you can watch all the Stephen Chow movies in the world, but if you don't have anyone to talk to about them and be excited about them, because like our cousins, they'd seen these movies and they understood the references, so they got it. They didn't have to, they processed it differently because it was a comedy movie for them. But for me, a Stephen Chow movie is a cultural artifact. It's something to explore because as the more I unpack it, the more I understand about like what was happening in Hong Kong at the time, albeit through a comedy lens, but it was giving me some sort of access to some sort of storytelling that like my excitement about like, oh, that's what this means was never in our family like a big deal. Like mom and dad would explain things, but it would always be with kind of like a, yeah, you don't know what this means. What are you, stupid? They never said, what are you, stupid? But, you know, just like, no, of course that's what that is. Why are you asking?
Not to diminish Stephen Chow, but it was very similar to as if, you know, one of our Chinese cousins came to America and couldn't speak English, but like glommed onto like Adam Sandler as his entry point into American culture. Not to say that Adam Sandler is equivalent to Stephen Chow.
But that what Stephen Chow is for me, this touchstone into kind of a certain perspective of Chinese culture. I hope, expanded my worldview and expanded kind of different avenues of exploring quote unquote this thing called Chinese culture. But like as a 13-year-old watching a slapstick comedy that as I have gotten older and as my Cantonese has slightly improved over the last 20 years, you know, I understand a little bit better. So like every once in a while I'll watch an old movie that I've seen a million times and there will still be a joke that like, oh, that's what that means. Oh, I get it now. And that is so important in comedy of like getting the joke.
Right.
So for me, the getting the joke is, yes, it's funny. Yes, but it's also like knowledge gaining for me because it's something that I was starved of. Right. And then to bring it back to what I was saying, then to have a friend who I could then talk about those things with and like being able to process those things with was really important to, I think, encouraging that. If I probably hadn't met him that was my sophomore year. Yeah, that was a sophomore year that we met, right? If I hadn't met him and I had that someone to speak Cantonese with, however poorly, but his was bad too, right? And to process watching movies and watch movies together, however much we didn't understand something, or we could like share our interpretations of jokes or share our interpretations of language. Like if I didn't have someone to kind of bounce that off with at that time, I probably would have given up on it and become a Republican.
You don't think it helped that you had Chinese speaking cousins? Because I feel like you...
Sure. No, yeah, absolutely. But I think that they were still a few years older than me.
Right.
Like, they're right in between me and you.
Right.
Right?
And that was an interesting dynamic, because they did kind of look up to me for, like, American... Like, teach me basketball. Let's talk about the NBA.
Sure.
And that's how we're going to connect.
Right. And then I wanted to watch them play Super Nintendo.
Right. The Famicom, I think they even had, right?
And tell me... Well, no, he had an American Super Nintendo, because if you got the Famicom, you couldn't play American games.
Oh,
but
right.
The American system could play Japanese games.
Right.
Yeah, no, I mean, obviously that helped. And like, again, but that goes into like just the general access of all of this stuff. And they like, oh, here's all of these things. Here's all the things.
Right.
Like, I remember 7th grade, so I'm 12, and this is 96. Like, Hello Kitty was like starting to pop up in America, or at least around us in Hampton Roads. And like, and I don't know, like, I don't know if Hello Kitty was around already in Hampton Roads in the mid 90s, or like it was starting to just kind of, Hello Kitty was starting to permeate into American culture at the time. But like, little Asian girls that I had crushes on at the time were starting to carry around Hello Kitty things. But there was this part of my brain where when we went to Hong Kong in 91, you know, like that's the first time I saw Hello Kitty. And so it's like, oh, I'm so cosmopolitan. I already know what Hello Kitty is. And I felt that way about like Power Rangers. Like,
right.
Like, why would anyone watch the Power Rangers? I already watched that a long time ago. You know, the 2 times I watched it on television in Hong Kong.
On the airplane or whatever.
On the airplane or whatever, right? But just like, you know, and I think that is probably the small town kid who goes to the big city of Hong Kong, not processing anything. And then like some bright visuals like a Hello Kitty or a Power Rangers is like the things that I can carry with me. So I feel so cool because I know what those are.
But that's the other, I think, really the difference between me and you, because when you were 7 and you went to Hong Kong, that you kind of absorbed that. When I was 7 or 8 and went to Hong Kong the previous time, when you were still a baby, I was the opposite. Like I said, like I would turn my nose at the Andy Lau singing a Janet Jackson song. I would, instead of like admiring the Japanese and Chinese toys in the Toys R Us, I had everyone buy me fucking He-Man toys, right? Like that's where I think, and maybe because you talk about small town kid in a big city, I was like the ugly American small town kid where it was just like, just let me go to McDonald's and buy He-Man toys.
So let's unwind that. Let's unpack that a little bit more then. This is what, 80, this is probably
86.
83? 86?
86. 83, you weren't born yet, Raymond. Remember, you were
no,
born
but wasn't
84.
there a trip that you went to before? You went before I was born.
Yeah, I was a baby when that happened.
You were a baby. Oh,
yeah.
you were a baby then.
Yeah.
Okay, so you went when you were like 8.
Yeah, 86, 9. Right. Yep.
Okay. So then at the time when mom and dad said, hey, we're going to Hong Kong, like, what did you feel then? Do you remember? Like, put aside how you felt by the time you got there, because the anxiety of like international travel, the anxiety of being in a land that you don't understand what everyone's saying. But like, do you remember being excited when you were a kid at the prospect of going to Hong Kong?
Yeah. No, I'm trying to remember when we went.
Like up to that point, DC would have been the biggest city you had ever been to.
Yeah, that's right.
Right?
That's right. Yeah, I mean, 3rd grade, I feel
like you went from DC, like you went from Luray to DC Chinatown to Hong Kong.
Yeah.
The biggest Chinatown you could find.
The thing I was most excited about was missing school, because I feel like we went in like January, February.
Oh, yeah, probably.
Oh, yeah. No, it was January. Right. Because we had a layover in Chicago, and that's why I'm a Chicago sports fan to this day. Because it was right after the Super Bowl, or right before the Super Bowl. So yeah, it was in January, February we went. So the thing I was excited about...
I don't understand that. I don't understand. I went to the airport, therefore this is my town, these are my teams. This is my kind of town. The hell?
No, yeah, it was 86, the January of 86, we went to Hong Kong, and I was excited. Because I remember it very clearly. The thing I was excited about was missing school. Because we were gone for like a month. And so I knew I was going to be out of school for a month. I was like, oh, that's fun. And I remember, like, I enjoyed the travel. Like I said, the O'Hare Airport made such an impression on me.
Clearly.
To this day, I claim Chicago as my own, even though I've only been to that city like 4 times in my life.
Yeah, you just liked it because Michael Jordan was good.
Well, yeah, I mean, 86, that was his ascension and the Bears. Like, those things are burned in my memory as a child, and then I've just retained them. Like everything else in my life, I retained the things that I liked when I was 8. And I remember the layover in Narita, because we had 2 layovers. We laid over in O'Hare and we laid over in Narita before we got to Hong Kong. And the time spent in Narita was really like mind blowing for me to see like all of the like cool toys and stuff. Like, but they were like Transformers, but with Japanese writing. And that blew my mind because I love Transformers, and these are like I knew like inherently that these were the original. Like I wasn't turning my nose at that. But I also remember in the Narita airport, like there was a cartoon playing on a screen, and then like you saw boobs, and I was like scarred for life.
Oh, sure.
Like, you can see boobs in cartoons? What is going on? But for some reason, once we got to Hong Kong, I do remember just kind of like, I'm only eating McDonald's and buying American toys at Toys R Us. Like, Mom and Dad tell the story to this day about we went to Dad's best friend's house, and his wife had prepared like this feast of American food for me specifically. And either I fell asleep because I was so jet lagged, or I just refused to eat because I'm an asshole.
It has, the second one's the only one that's like a story. The first one's forgivable. The second one,
yeah.
The second one is like, you need to feel guilty about that for the rest of your life.
Maybe it was somewhere in between.
Because you know, if the thing happened to you now, you would hate that kid so much.
Oh, you're for sure. If my kid did that, yeah.
That's what I'm saying. Like if you were embarrassed, you should feel a little.
It could be somewhere in between. Like maybe I was grumpy because I was jet lagged, and then fell asleep.
Sure,
you know.
Right.
But yeah, so that trip, I remember again, just kind of.
Did you go back to Toy San on that trip?
No, that was the next one.
That was just Hong Kong.
Yeah, that was just a Hong Kong trip. The next one in 90 when we went, that was the only time I'd ever been to China. I haven't been back since. I mean, maybe, did we go to Shenzhen in 92? Maybe just like...
Oh, I don't know. Maybe
we just dipped over and came back. But 91 is when we went and visited Mom's village with Grandpa, Gong Gong. And I remember that pretty vividly.
I don't have any actual memories. Like, I've seen photos and I know I was there, but I don't have any
But you were old enough. You were like 7.
Yeah, but I mean, none of it stuck. Like, I mean, that's what I'm saying. Like, it's blurred into the picture.
You had your own imaginary talk show at the time.
That wasn't during the trip where we went to Toy Story.
Was that 92? Maybe that was 92.
Yeah, that was the year later.
Yeah. Raymond Kills. Yeah. That was your...
That's what it was called.
Raymond... Yeah.
Oh, okay.
You would occasionally like look to the side.
Yeah, no, I
like you would do like the Zach Morris.
No, I did that for a few months later. Like I was still doing that, just no one was paying attention.
Like,
yeah.
On this episode of Raymond Kills.
I wonder if that's a phenomenon for kids my age.
Well, right, because you guys
thought that we were being meta as like 7-year-olds talking to a fictional audience.
Right, doing the aside.
Because you know what? Now that you're saying it's like, I don't know. When I was 7, did I know that there was no audience, or like did I think there was an audience? I actually don't know. Like what was going through my head. I know that I did that, but I don't know what I was thinking. That's kind of terrifying.
So yeah, before we wrap.
Are we done? Are we done now?
I mean, we've gone over an hour already. Because this next bit is about food, and I'm pretty sure it's probably going to go for some time. But, we've talked about how much, like, the Chinese-American restaurant is formative to both of our childhoods, right? Like, even though you have less memory of Brown's, that place is still in the firmament of your personhood. And then you spent... your entire childhood, as you said, in a closet, working the cash register at 8 years old or whatever.
Yeah, when you were in Brown's, I mean, how much work were you doing at Brown's?
I washed dishes and I bussed tables. I never handled the register.
So you weren't front of house. You were never.
I was never front of house.
Stuff.
Although I would run around the restaurant as a kid. Not
front of house.
But I never was like interfaced with customers.
Yeah.
Like the only time I actually interfaced with customers, again, this is a story I've told on this podcast, is I believe, when did Return of the Jedi come out? 83. My 6th birthday. I got the Ewok Village. Oh. And I had a birthday party in the party room.
You put it on the table.
At Brown's. No, I sat it. The box was huge. The box was the size of me, basically. Yeah. And I sat, and I don't know if you remember the geography of the restaurant, but like the front door, if you turn to the right is the party room, and then immediately is the cash register. So I sat the Ewok Village box, like, in the entrance to the party room and just sat on it as customers filed in and out of the restaurant, just telling them about the Ewok Village.
How old were you?
This is my 6th birthday. It was
so 6. Oh.
This is before you were born. Year before you were born.
Yeah.
So that's the only time I actually interfaced with customers. But when I got a little bit older, they had me wash dishes, and thinking back, like I think that's when I first realized I had a shrimp allergy, because I would like handle all the food, like wiping it off the plates and sticking them in the dishwasher. And then, I'm like 10 years old. I don't know anything. And I like wipe my eyes. Maybe it wasn't just shrimp, right? Like literally all of the germs.
Yeah, it was, yeah.
But I just remember a few times just getting like my throat kind of closing, and like, back then Mom didn't give a shit. She was like, you're fine. They didn't believe I was allergic to shrimp until I was like 21 years old. But yeah, I never worked front of house. Why?
Well, I mean, like for me, I was like, because I was running the cash register from like 8, right?
Right.
I should clarify to the audience, I was only doing this on the weekends. I wasn't coming home straight from, like, I was at home a lot of the time. But like every weekend for like 10 years. Was at the restaurant, and I was doing the cash register, and then I was waiting on tables like
pretty
in
early.
My teenage years.
Yeah.
And then I was washing dishes, and I was bringing it up because I do think that like on some level, I don't know how true this is. Maybe this is just me coming up with excuses, but like on some level, I feel like my time as a front of house person as a child, it like affected my ability to socially interact with people
without trying to convince them to order the steak
to
cube.
to order beef and broccoli. No, like, you know, like, because to be a good waiter is to be visible and invisible at the same time, and like knowing when to do those things. And I never really stopped doing that. I never really stopped like, I think I'm gonna be invisible now, or should I be visible? And...
Just get this girl water for now.
Yeah,
and
yeah,
come back.
Yeah, exactly. I'm just gonna make sure that she's got everything that she needs, and then I'm gonna leave and just hope for a tip later. That's pretty much how I've interacted with people ever since.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. Because by that time, right at Brown's, I never actually worked at Brown's, but I spent my life there because unlike you, you know, I wasn't a latchkey kid until much later. Those first, because you were, I mean, that's the thing, you were like illegally a latchkey kid because mom and dad were leaving you home alone at like 9 years old.
Well, I mean, but like after school, like, I mean, I was going to school. It's not like I was like stuck in the...
No, but I spent my childhood literally at the restaurant until I was at least 13 because, and you know, I think after you were born and then you were no longer at Mama's house, that you and I were home alone. But that was like, you know, only probably a couple years before you guys moved.
Sure.
So, but for a good portion of my like childhood, I just stayed in the office. Like our cousin talks all the time about how he didn't stay as often as I did. I was literally there 5 days a week. He would come like maybe 2 or 3 days a week and we would like play in the office. I'd have to like...
Was there a TV in there?
There was a TV. Yeah, I watched, and then like when 7 o'clock rolled, I used to resent grandma and great grandma because when 7 o'clock rolled around, they came in to watch Wheel of Fortune. And I used to just like curse them under my breath. Like, why are you watching Wheel of Fortune? You can't even speak English, right? Because they were taking away my TV time. Even though my TV time was literally from 3 o'clock until 7 o'clock.
Also, and what are you watching at 7 o'clock? Like, what would have been on at 7 o'clock?
Oh, I don't know. Given any given day, I'm sure I was watching like Three's Company reruns or something like that. Yeah, I was all about the 80s and 70s, 80s television. Like, I watched Welcome Back, Kotter and Brady Bunch and stuff growing up. Anyway, so but I was at the restaurant, and you know, I just remember like also access to all that food was probably not healthy because at one point I was able to just grab like a handful of sweet and sour pork and dump it in the fryer myself. You know what I mean? Anyway, so the reason I bring it up is that the thing I want to ask you, usually on this podcast, I always ended asking the people about the food they grew up with, blah, 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 blah. But with you
know what I grew up with.
I knew what you grew up with, so it'd be dumb to ask, and the folks at home don't need to listen to that. Because you'll just say, like, you know, boiled chicken, roast pork, and lettuce, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but the thing I want to talk to you about is the notion of Chinese American food. You know, this is my big bugaboo, is that I feel that oftentimes other Asian Americans don't respect Chinese American food. You know, this, I know your opinion, but this is what I want the audience to listen to. What is your opinion of Chinese American food?
I mean, I have a lot of affection for it because I think it's really good. Like, there's no reason that General Tso's chicken shouldn't be as celebrated as a Popeye's fried chicken sandwich, right? Like, we just take it for granted that there is this food out there that everybody eats. Everybody eats. Like, regardless of whatever religious affiliation. Like, if it's not your holiday coming up, you can go to a Chinese restaurant and eat even though everything's closed. And, like, here's the thing, is when there is this attack that American Chinese food is not authentic, I don't know what that means. Like, I don't know what it means that it's not authentic. But on the other hand, I do know what they mean when they say it's not authentic. And because our parents and most of our uncles would pretty readily say that it's not quote-unquote real Chinese food, right? And if they mean by, like, yes, when they were growing up in Hong Kong or when they were growing up in the mainland or wherever, they weren't eating this exact stuff. They weren't eating American broccoli with beef in a soy sauce thing, right? But if it's not authentic because, like, Chinese people weren't eating it at the time, it's still an important part of American Chinese history as a survival tactic. Right? And, like, the fact that it's something that people like and we carry this kind of resentment or shame about it, like not want to be associated with it. It's like, it's one of the one successful things we have. It's General So and Bruce Lee. Let's just take these and use them and embrace them for, you know, for being what they are. And like, I get it that, like, you know, if you grew up eating traditional Cantonese style food because you were in Chinatown, right, that, you know, oh, actually, a somewhat related story. So I had dim sum last weekend, and I ordered a big plate of what in English would be described as Cantonese style chicken chow mein. Mm-hmm. The menu here had it as pan fried chicken noodles. Right. I was with Brooklyn born and raised Chinese people, and I had told them beforehand I'm going to order chicken chow mein, and they went, haha, you fucking American, right? Like they were just like dogging, because in their mind what they thought I was ordering was the prepackaged
noodles, with the slop
the
on top.
Package of noodle in the cellophane wrap, and you know the cube of chop suey mixed vegetables that you then pour on top of it, and not the Cantonese style, because that friend didn't understand chicken chow mein translates to like pan fried noodle, like that those were the same dish. Like I was ordering the Cantonese one, not the American one, but like the words were the same. And there is something about that kind of like lost in translation that erases kind of the experiences that we were growing up on, right? And I could understand like kids in our situation also resenting this stuff, right?
Because it's painful, because it reminds you of the time you had to work at the restaurant and not go to the prom
and not
or something.
And not go out, not go hang out and have a normal quote unquote normal childhood where I guess you just like ride bikes onto the freeway or something. I freely admit I don't know what normal kids were doing, because I was washing dishes and waiting on tables, right? Like I don't know. I don't know what they were doing.
They were just having sex and drinking beer.
having unprotected sex and following Jesus. I guess that's what happens when you go out there.
Yeah, especially in Chesapeake. That's like you know, Christian Coalition headquarters and everything.
Well, we were next to
literally, literally, like we used to deliver them chicken chow mein all the time.
Yeah.
Right to Pat Roberts, we would just give them the chicken chow mein.
American Chinese food is something that will never go away, because Americans are always going to eat it. And American, like, it is so embedded in American culture. Now, probably there is a lot to unpack about what it means that it's embedded. It's embedded and not understood, right? There is a common sensibility to it that probably is missing a few important links in the historical chain.
So what I don't understand too about like Asian American disdain for Chinese American food is that, to me, Chinese American food is the ultimate expression of Asian American identity, right?
Well,
because those same Asian Americans who clown chicken chow mein or General Tso's chicken also resent the fact that people assume that they don't speak English, right? But if your whole raison d'etre is authenticity, you shouldn't be offended that people assume you speak Chinese, because if you're going to be the authentic Chinese person, right? Like, that's just, I mean, I'm being facetious, but not really. Like, I feel like that's how they sound to me when you clown Chinese American food and then profess like Asian Americanness and you know, perpetual foreign and all that shit. It's like the most Asian American thing we have is this Asian American food, Chinese American food, because as you said, it's a symbol of like survival and adaptation, right? And without being assimilation, right? Because it's still distinctly its own thing that straddles the space between.
So what I would say, you're right. I mean, I just, instead of assimilation, it's accretion. We have added something.
Right.
This didn't exist before because you didn't have American ingredients and you didn't have Chinese techniques.
Right.
We have married those two things together, and we have married those two things together for like 180 years now. Right? That this has been in growing and in formation. And you know, it's funny because like authenticity is it's a weird idea when, like, if you think about the standard American chicken chow mein, right? How old is boba?
Right.
How old is boba? What, like 1980s, 1990s? Get the fuck out of here. It's not.
Exactly.
It's not. There is no like long chain of history to make this. This is how you know you're authentically Asian because you're.
Thank you.
Now, let me tie this all back though to an earlier point about the proliferation of technology and the proliferation of communication across continent. The fact that, like, boba as a late 20th century, early 21st century kind of craze, and the fact that it was able to permeate West Coast and eventually East Coast, and now it's for fucking everywhere, right? Like, the speed at which it became this totem of Asian American identity to the point of parody now, to the point of camp. That is an example of kind of, I don't know what the Asian American identity means in this mass cultural context. You know, we're at the tail end of Asian American History Month, and I feel like I noticed more this year than other years, a lot of corporations wanting to celebrate Asian voices, right? Like, I guess it's because a lot of people are like fucking beating the shit out of Asians, so they're like,
I think the Stop Asian Hate has something to do with that.
Yeah, we want to be especially like vocal about supporting our Asian brothers and sisters or what have you. That there has been it's been very noticeable that it's a lot of Asian and Asian American versus purely Asian American kind of libraries of films or music or what have you. And it's an interesting, we're in an interesting moment for the Asian American identity where it was defined by its paucity of connection to the motherland, right?
Right.
The either sometimes by choice, sometimes against our will, right? Because our situation, we're the first generation kids and we don't speak the language, and so it feels so distantly far. And then the other version is you're refugees and you can't go back for whatever reason, right? But that's different now. Even now, like now, you go online and whatever enclave, ethnic, political, religious, you find them online and you can continue to push the tradition. You can continue to push the identity and it sets with you and can stay with you longer. So we're in this interesting space where what does the Asian American identity look like in a global context that is completely different from what we were doing?
Yeah, like the notion that a K-pop band like BTS can not only permeate, the culture, but be
the biggest
fawned over by non-Asians.
Sure.
Like, in fact, I almost feel like BTS's fan base is more non-Asian than it is Asian now. I mean, there's no way you get the number one record in the country without being a crossover, right?
Right.
And that's unheard of. And I talk about it all the time with my wife, is like J-pop never crossed over. Cantopop never crossed over. Like what? And I think to your point, it's because the internet didn't exist in the 90s the way it does now. It definitely didn't exist in the 80s. Like when those waves of like Cantopop and J-pop were what dominated Asian pop culture, right? Just the ease at which you have access to what you said, like, the access that you had to Stephen Chow movies, multiply that by 10,000 for whoever the 7-year-old Raymond of 2021 is.
But also your parents having that same level of access, right? Like the fact that the whole unit, like, will be experiencing it together at the same time.
But so to that point, then, my whole crusade for putting some respect on American Chinese food's name is an artifact of a bygone era. Absolutely. Then, right? Because to what you're saying, being Asian American isn't about taking American ingredients and infusing it with Asian techniques, right? Because now that's just fusion, and fusion is looked down upon. It is about, well, I'm going to do the thing that's most related to the motherland. So I'm going to have, very specific foods and like this notion of like being Asian American is now a global thing and not, what we said before. Asian American kids now are bilingual and proudly bilingual, right? Like you have weeaboos learning Japanese and Korean now.
Right. And loving Avatar. But that's a different podcast.
Yeah. So I'm not going to ask you to share your social medias because I know you don't do social media, but is there anything that you would like folks to know about either you online or something online that you want to just shine a light on?
Well, I mean, we have our mutual friend Jerry Ma, who he just came out with his Kickstarter of the Monkey King project, which relates to our conversation and about, what is the Chinese American experience for a certain generation, and this marriage of Chinese mythology and a New York setting is it's very specifically Chinese American, right? And his Kickstarter is on its last 10 days, and so if you haven't donated to that, I would ask people to donate to that, because some of the money that will go into his Kickstarter is going to stores around Chinatown as well. As part of his stretch goals, he's handing out money to people in Chinatown.
Literally,
he's literally
Chinatown.
handing out money to people in Chinatown.
Yeah, great plug. Definitely support the Monkey King.
Yeah,
Chinatown.
Make sure
Odyssey.
Jerry knows that I plugged him.
Yeah, will do. I'm gonna put that. That's the title of the podcast.
Ray plugs Jerry. That's a different movie me and Jerry made.
Thank you for indulging me, Raymond, and allowing me to have you on the podcast.
I hope you get more guests soon.
Otherwise, the June episode will also be me and Raymond unpacking some more of my childhood trauma. Until then, you can follow me on Twitter at @TheRealChow, _real_Chow, and follow this podcast at Southern Asians on Twitter and at Southern Fried Asians on Instagram. Go to Hard Knock Media to find this and all of the podcasts in the network, including the brand new podcast Raymond alluded to earlier, Shelf Conscious, which is my little toy podcast where I can finally talk about the things I actually care about, and that's action figures. Soundwave. I bought Soundwave.
Whatever.
And I didn't even bring it up. You brought it up.
I know.
God
No,
damn it.
I know.
I went an hour and a
I was
half.
very proud of you. You didn't bring it up once.
I didn't bring it up once that I bought Soundwave the day you were born.
Dad
Starscream.
gave you Soundwave or whatever.
From Best. That's the best part.
Wait, Starscream's the plane?
Starscream is the plane. God, you don't act stupid like you don't know you're transforming.
I'm sorry. I don't hold this knowledge tightly.
One thing we didn't get into, and maybe I will invite you back next month, is that you're the reason I'm into this nerd shit to begin with.
Oh, okay.
Had I not read whatever Nightfall issue you gave me when I came down
It was 8.
to Chesapeake.
Issue 8.
And we started going to Trilogy Comics every week.
Yeah.
Anyway, follow us at The Nerds of Color. Subscribe and download. Give us a like and a review. And until next time, keep it Southern Fried, y'all.